Independent media parrots questionable Uyghur genocide claims by Patrick McFarlane. On January 19, 2021, during the Trump administration's twilight hours, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo formally accused the Chinese government of committing genocide against the Uyghur Muslims of the Xinjiang region of western China. The press statement alleged arbitrary imprisonment or other severe deprivation of physical liberty of more than 1 million civilians, forced sterilization, torture of a large number of those arbitrarily detained, forced labor, and the imposition of draconian restrictions on freedom of religion or belief, freedom of expression, and freedom of movement.
A Fox News alert now. The United States leveling perhaps the most serious charge a country can face, accusing China in the last hour and a bit of committing genocide and crimes against humanity in its repression of Uyghur Muslims. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo made the announcement just a short time ago. He joins us now for an exclusive interview. Mr. Secretary, good to have you with us. Let me just read, if I could, from your statement. You said, quote, "I have determined that the People's Republic of China, under the direction and control of the Chinese Communist Party, has committed genocide and crimes against the predominantly Muslim Uyghurs and other ethnic and religious minority groups."
This is forced labor, this is forced sterilizations, forced abortions, John, the kind of things that we haven't seen in an awfully long time in this world. And we now have conducted an exhaustive review of the facts and made the determination that, in fact, the Chinese Communist Party has committed these crimes against humanity, is continuing to try and deny these people, not just the Uyghur Muslims, but other faiths as well, the simple capacity to continue to exist and to create an ethnic set of activities that we haven't seen in an awfully long time. I've referred to this over time as the stain of the century. It is truly that. And today's actions is simply a continuation of the work this administration has done to try and convince the Chinese Communist Party to cease this terrible, terrible set of human rights violations that have been taking place.
The accusation was the climax of the Trump administration's evolving trade war against the Chinese people. For all of the Republican condemnation of Joe Biden's weak China policy, the Biden administration, led by neoliberal ghoul Antony Blinken, did not waste any time endorsing Mike Pompeo's accusation of genocide and has doubled down on targeted economic sanctions.
In your opening statement, you talked about the Chinese Communist Party, who continues to commit terrible human rights abuses. I want to talk about that. You have confirmed that you believe it is genocide, that the Uyghurs, a religious and ethnic minority in China, has experienced, as you know, brutal repression at the hands of the Chinese government. What do you plan to do with within the first 30 days to address what Joe Biden has described as a genocide committed by the Chinese government?
So on the Uyghurs, I think we're very much in agreement, and the forcing men, women, and children into concentration camps, trying to, in effect, re-educate them to be adherents to the ideology of the Chinese Communist Party. All of that speaks to an effort to commit genocide, and so I agree with that finding. I think we have to look at the tools that we have available to us, including some of the tools that the Congress has provided, to see what actions we can take. So, for example, I think we should be looking at making sure that we are not importing products that are made with forced labor from Xinjiang. That's one such thing. We need to make sure that we're also not exporting technologies and tools that could be used to further their repression. That's one place to start.
The evolution of diplomatic tension between the United States and China is the dark prophecy of a principle often attributed to Frederick Bastiat. Quote, "If goods do not cross borders, soldiers will." Indeed, the charge of genocide has been heralded writ large across the mainstream media, regurgitated by such truth-tellers as the New York Times, the BBC, The Guardian, CNN, The Independent, Reuters, and by a cast of other usual suspects. Those not accusing the Chinese government of genocide spew hawkish rhetoric at a fevered pitch unheard since perhaps the invasion of Iraq. Even sometimes anti-war voices in the mainstream, such as Tucker Carlson, Bill Maher, and John Oliver, have joined in the saber-rattling.
So last week in the Wall Street Journal, there was a kind of remarkable op-ed stating as clearly as anyone has ever stated the nature of the threat that we face from China. The op-ed was written by someone who would know, the Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe. He called the Communist Party of China, quote, the greatest threat to democracy and freedom worldwide since World War II. It's an amazing piece, worth your time if you haven't read it. In just a moment, we'll have Director Ratcliffe on to discuss that. He wrote this, quote, the intelligence is clear. Beijing intends to dominate the United States and the rest of the planet economically, militarily, and technologically. I call its approach of economic espionage, rob, replicate, and replace. China robs U.S. companies of their intellectual property, replicates the technology, and then replaces the U.S. firms in the global marketplace.
We all know China does bad stuff. They break promises about Hong Kong autonomy, they put Uyghurs in camps and punish dissent, and we don't want to be that. But it's got to be something between authoritarian government that tells everyone what to do and a representative government that can't do anything at all. In 2 generations, China has built 500 entire cities from scratch, moved the majority of their huge population from poverty to the middle class, and mostly cornered the market in 5G and pharmaceuticals. Oh, and they bought Africa. Their new Silk Road initiative is the biggest infrastructure project in history, indebting not just that continent, but large parts of Asia, Europe, and the Middle East to the people who built their roads, bridges, and ports. If you want to go anywhere in the world these days, you better have a yen for travel.
There's an ethnic group in China being systematically surveilled and imprisoned in an attempt to essentially wipe their culture off the map. The people in question are the Uyghurs. They're a mostly Muslim ethnic minority in a region of China called Xinjiang, and the Chinese government has been treating them absolutely terribly.
A UN panel says the region resembles a massive internment camp, where more than 1 million Muslim minorities have been rounded up, detained, and forcibly indoctrinated by the Chinese regime. Witness accounts, satellite imagery, and Communist Party documents reveal what appears to be the largest imprisonment of people on the basis of religion since the Holocaust.
Much has changed since Operation Iraqi Freedom. The legacy media is desperate for ratings. The U.S. propaganda arm must know that controlling the narrative is no longer as simple as infiltrating television, print, and radio. Accordingly, a survey of prominent independent outlets reveals the same U.S. State Department narrative on China. For example, The Joe Rogan Experience, the largest podcast in the world, with approximately 200 million listeners per month, has validated the Uyghur Genocide claim with Ben Shapiro.
It's one thing to say I don't want to get involved in the tax rates of other countries. It's another thing to say shaving people's heads, shipping them on trains to concentration camps where you force them into labor and or sterilize them. That seems like not an internal issue that you're not allowed to criticize, really.
Yeah, that's a big one. But the China thing is so crazy because so many business interests have this connection with them, and so much of the money that they generate is because of China.
Rogan has gone even further, giving the CIA itself a platform to spook its China propaganda.
I'm very excited to talk to you because I had a guy on, Jamie Metzl yesterday, a scientist who scared the shit out of me, talking about China. He's talking about China. We were talking about China amassing naval power, China's taking over tech companies, and how huge they're getting and how much influence they have over their people as opposed to the way we do it.
Well, he's not wrong.
No.
He's not, I can't spot the lie in what you just said, but it's China that's the biggest problem. And so this guy is absolutely right. Jamie's right.
It was terrifying.
Yeah.
Listen to what he was talking about, the way he was explaining how they have this plan. I think he said 2049 to be the global superpower of the world and essentially take the place of what America used to be.
Yeah,
they do it their way.
And do it their way, which means we're going to bypass all the costs and the heavy lift of research and development over the years, and we're just going to steal everything. Yeah. And they've been doing it for decades.
Among the guilty are Steven Crowder,
They hog tie women during forced abortion. Of course, they jail political dissidents. They demolish Christian churches, unless you say, this is your bias. They also not only confiscate Bibles and Christians, torture Muslim Uyghurs in detention camps.
Dave Rubin. Reason Magazine.
But in China's far west, there's a boom in construction of what journalists, former inmates, and the United States government call concentration camps. A vast and growing network of what the Chinese government refers to as vocational training centers are believed to hold between 1 and 3 million people, perhaps as much as a quarter of the Muslim population of Xinjiang province.
Vice.
We delved into Hotan Prefecture's government records, which show that in 2017 alone, the number of kindergartens more than doubled. This was at the same time that China began sending hundreds of thousands of Uyghur adults to the camps. We identified several more compounds in Hotan, all built around the same time and with the same distinctive features. Large, walled-off complexes with colourful turrets and brightly painted patterns on the ground. We wanted to head back to Xinjiang to investigate. Knowing we were already on the government's radar, the risks were higher.
The Young Turks.
What's happening in China here is actually one of the worst outrages in the world. And it's being basically brushed aside for a number of reasons. But you can call it detention camps, you can call it internment camps, you can call it concentration camps. It's got about 1 million people in those camps.
And Democracy Now!
China is facing widespread condemnation following a BBC report about the mass rape and sexual torture of Uyghur women and other Muslims detained in the province of Xinjiang. Several former prisoners spoke on camera to the BBC's Matthew Hill. A warning to our audience, these clips contain disturbing descriptions of sexual abuse.
Of all the above independent outlets, the most egregious purveyor of Chinese fear-mongering is Tim Pool, an independent journalist who emerged into prominence during Occupy Wall Street. Pool has exploded in popularity during the COVID lockdowns and during the run-up to the 2020 election, garnering more than 35 million views on YouTube alone in the last 30 days. Tim Pool is good on many issues. He opposes the COVID lockdowns and bailouts, the BLM riots, cancel culture, police brutality, corruption, and above all, dishonesty in the media. Tim Pool has platformed good libertarian voices such as Dave Smith, Michael Malice, Eric July, Julie Borowski, Phil Labonte, Scott Horton, and Luke Rudkowski, who has unfortunately joined Tim Pool's Uyghur Genocide claims.
Even from the reporting we got from the BBC, we got information that Uyghur women are systematically forced on by other men in abusive ways that we can't even mention here on YouTube, tortured, organ harvested, and murdered. The BBC even did interviews with women that were in charge of tying down and stripping down other women, of witnesses and survivors. And when we're talking about the extermination, torture, rape, and extinction of an entire society.
In spite of his praiseworthy qualities, Pool's accusations against China are bombastic. Take, for instance, the lizard brain caliber of his segment titles. The first being, China is colonizing the entire world, even as it extracts the U.S. This is how they win. And China weaponizes U.S. wokeness where they used to mock the white left. They know what they're doing. Further, Joe Biden will sell the U.S. out to China on a silver platter if they ask for it. And, of course, the Chinese Communist Party is profiting off its human rights abuses against minority groups. In a March 23, 2021 segment, Pool claimed, quote,
"We are facing quite possibly the biggest threat we have ever faced, a rising and despotic authoritarian Chinese Communist Party."
In the same segment, Pool commended the Biden administration's imposition of sanctions against China for human rights abuses against the Uyghurs.
In what I can only hope is the right move, the Biden administration has joined the EU in sanctioning China over their mistreatment of Uyghur Muslims. For those that aren't familiar, China is operating concentration camps for a religious minority, and it's shocking and disgusting. And it's about time we saw some action. Now, in the past, I've said I think sanctions may be the right move. I'm not a prophet. I'm not a psychic. I just hope this makes sense. And I will say it outright. I believe Biden's administration deserves credit for imposing sanctions on China so far. I hope it's the right move. But so long as there is proactive action being taken to stop the abuse of the Uyghur Muslims, then I will absolutely give credit to Joe Biden's administration, though I am still cautious that he may not be up for the job. And I don't know if Kamala Harris or anyone else in the administration is going to do the right thing as it pertains to these human rights abuses.
As for the content behind his ludicrous headlines, Poole broadcast the same U.S. State Department talking points, reporting many unsubstantiated allegations as fact. Like the above mainstream media outlets, he has made affirmative claims that Uyghurs are being detained in concentration camps where they are subjected to systematic sexual torture, involuntary sterilization, and organ harvesting.
I'm telling you, we've heard the horror stories of history. What's going on right now in China will go down in history as one of the most vile and disgusting acts of human rights abuses ever. Not the most. I'm not saying the most. There were some really, really bad things that happened throughout history, but definitely one of the worst. So
I was going to say it will go down in history if China doesn't win, because if China wins, they're going to rewrite history in their own kind of version.
We have this from the New York Post. Biden dismisses Uyghur internment camps because we have to keep the language family friendly.
We can't even say that word?
No, we can't.
Oh, goodness.
You can't say it.
I'm writing it in my journal.
Yeah. No joke. What's going on in China? We can't say it. But
what's the word? What's the first and last letter of the word?
I guess
starts with a G.
Oh,
yeah, it starts with a G. Yeah.
We can call them internment camps.
Oh, okay.
We can call them forceful re-education centers. We can say that women are being held down while men come in and force themselves upon the women. The women are undergoing forced surgeries and other extreme forced sterilization, as well as the forceful. This is tough.
Brutal, dude.
Yeah. This is brutal. There's more.
We should do it in the bonus segment and just be explicit.
There's so much more.
The genesis of these claims stem from a June 2020 report by German Christian fundamentalist researcher Adrian Zenz. This same Adrian Zenz has stated he is, quote, led by God to uncover the Chinese government's treatment of its Uyghur minority.
Tell us, who is Adrian Zenz?
Who is Adrian Zenz? That is indeed the right question to start with. Basically, Adrian Zenz is a right-wing religious fanatic who believes in the rapture, like Mike Pompeo, at least supposedly he does. Who knows what he actually believes? But Zenz is a genuine religious fanatic who also believes that women should not be given equality, gender equality, that is a plot by Satanists to ruin their correct status in the home. So he is not somebody who should be allowed to be sounding off on this kind of issue without the most careful scrutiny and fact-checking, which, of course, we know that BBC, Associated Press, and CNN just totally failed to do. They were not interested in checking on him. They picked it up, lock, stock, and barrel. But he's not qualified. I mean, he speaks, at least we know that he reads Chinese. He uses Chinese documents, but he simply does not use them honestly. He distorts their meaning. And in some cases, as Max picked up, I mean, he's the one who found this, he completely magnified the size of a particular statistic by a factor of 10. And that's we'll get to that when we come to that part of the storyline. But basically, he is not to be trusted at all, and instead he's been picked up by the country's leading major news outlets, as well as now the highest officials of the United States. It's alarming, to say the least.
Zenz was recently sued by several Chinese firms who allege his defamatory research caused compensable harm to their industries and led directly to U.S. sanctions. Investigative journalists Gareth Porter and Max Blumenthal have thoroughly refuted Zenz's work, concluding, quote, "A careful review of Zenz's research shows that his assertion of genocide is contradicted by flagrant data abuse, fraudulent claims, cherry-picking of source material, and propagandistic misrepresentations." As illustrated by Porter and Blumenthal, Zenz's allegations are easily explained by a shift in China's one-child policy and improved access to voluntary birth control and family planning.
The point that really has to be made at the outset, talking about the whole question of China's population policy, is that it was from the beginning a policy that established harsh, if you will, harsh limits on births by the Han majority. And it did so at a time when the Uyghurs were being exempted from those harsh measures or those harsh limitations on the number of births that could be used by or allowed to the Han Chinese population. The limit was one child per family for the urban Han population and 2 children for rural Han population. And the Uyghurs were allowed to have 2 children for urban couples and 3 children for rural couples. So they were given a very distinctly more favorable, if you will, in terms of their own desires, a more favorable situation in regard to freedom to practice their own family planning. Now, of course, Uyghurs want to have large families. Their culture is one of definitely wanting large families, even more than Han Chinese after several decades under a Chinese communist rule. And so the reality is that, in fact, Uyghurs had, in many cases, I can't give you a specific percentage, but in a very large proportion of cases, they were having much larger families. And Zenz himself even concedes that the Uyghurs often had 8 or even 9 children in their families. And so it's pretty well documented that they were not at all subject to meaningful limits on their family planning as the Han Chinese were until 2017. And then, the Chinese government made a fundamental decision, a policy decision, that both Han Chinese and Uyghurs would be subject to the same limits on family planning, the same one that the Uyghurs had been subject to before: 2 children for urban couples, 3 children for rural couples. And that represented a major concession to the Han Chinese. It allowed them a much greater freedom compared with what they had been subject to before. And so this is the context, really, the policy context in which these statistics are, should be evaluated. I think Zenz does not deny that, but Zenz steers the reader away from that fundamental reality, which puts an entirely different slant on, an entirely different perspective on the whole question of limits on Uyghur families.
Zenz and others in the mainstream media rely heavily on, quote, eyewitness accounts of human rights abuses. Such accounts form the basis for everything from Tim Pool's daily talk shows to the U.S. State Department's official 2020 reports on human rights practices, the latter of which does not contain citations, making it nearly impossible to audit. This reliance on eyewitness accounts of human rights abuses is troublesome, given that eyewitness testimony is one of the least reliable forms of evidence. Moreover, these accounts were not given under oath, were not subject to cross-examination, and their credibility was not evaluated by a fact-finder such as a judge or jury. They are not reliable. Were the testimony subject to these basic legal safeguards, it would likely be found wanting, in part because the alleged eyewitnesses constantly changed their testimony, especially after contact with organizations linked to the U.S. State Department. Blogger Bernard, also known as Moon of Alabama, has scrutinized some of the most cited cases. First is the case of Sargul Sautbay, a Uyghur woman who claims to have been imprisoned in a Chinese re-education camp. When Sautbay was first interviewed about her alleged experience in the camps, she claims she was an instructor there, that she never witnessed any violence while working, and that meat was never served at the camp. Sargul Sautbay said that the Chinese government did not allow her to leave the country because she was a member of the Communist Party and worked in the so-called political re-education camp for ethnic minorities. In China, they call it a political camp, but in reality, it's a prison in the mountains. They took me there in 2018. This political camp was for Kazakhs. There were only Kazakhs while I was there. I worked in just one of the camps. I was told that there were 2 camps like this. There were 2,500 people where I was. After gaining asylum in Sweden, several interviews were arranged for her by what Haaretz only called, quote, a Swedish Uyghur Association, a term perhaps meant to obfuscate its connection with the World Uyghur Congress, a Munich-based organization with ties to the U.S. State Department. Her story then changed. She now claims to have been a detainee at the camp, that she witnessed horrific violence there, and that Muslim Uyghur detainees were forced to eat pork. Another eyewitness, Turnsune Ziawudun, claimed to have witnessed the systematic rape of detainees in internment camps. Her allegations were trumpeted by the mainstream media in February 2021. Quizzically, when Ziawudun was first interviewed after leaving China, she did not testify that she had witnessed any rape or violence. Also, as reported by Moon of Alabama, many Uyghur eyewitnesses are groomed through organizations connected to the U.S. State Department and the CIA, such as Radio Free Asia, the World Uyghur Congress, and the Uyghur Human Rights Project. These organizations procured many of their eyewitnesses through Adagert, Erekteleri, which translates as Volunteers of the Fatherland, a group founded by ethnic Kazakh Sherikzan Bilash to, quote, keep track of Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, and Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Through 2018 and 2019, Bilash and other members of Adagert traveled across Xinjiang, convincing unsophisticated Uyghur farmers to, quote, speak up about their detained relatives in Xinjiang. They arranged interviews with international media, helped people write petitions to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and helped people record thousands of video appeals, which they all made public on their YouTube channel. One wonders how a group of, quote, a few dozen rural Kazakhs had the means to connect rural Uyghur farmers with the international media without the assistance of special interest groups. In March 2019, the Kazakh government shut Adagert down and arrested Bilash for, quote, inciting ethnic hatred. He was fined and released on the condition he cease his activism for 7 years. He has since fled to Turkey with his family. Bilash's attorney blames Kazakhstan's position in the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative as motivation to quell his dissent. Even if the Kazakh government was cooperating with the Chinese government to silence Bilash, it would not preclude the possibility that Bilash and Adagert's allegations are unfounded. The Xinjiang Victim Database is another oft-cited source for atrocity testimony. However, its FAQ section admits that its submissions are not fact-checked and should not be treated as, quote, hard facts. Furthermore, its founder, Jean Bunin, admits that most of the facts that are independently corroborated, that is, confirmed through the Chinese government itself, is procured through Radio Free Asia, an organization that has deep connections to the CIA. The involvement of Attijert and Radio Free Asia in the procurement of eyewitness testimony is even more suspect given the CIA's alleged use of Uyghur terrorists as proxy forces. Indeed, the CIA is rumored to have recruited and trained Uyghur Muslims for clandestine operations throughout the Middle East. Journalist Eric Margulies told Scott Horton in both November 2008 and April 2009 interviews that he witnessed Uyghur Muslims being trained in Afghanistan by Osama bin Laden and the Pakistani ISI with the knowledge and support of the CIA for the purpose of destabilizing China.
So you have people who were, so-called Arab Afghans or whatever, who were traveling to Afghanistan, maybe training in the camps or whatever. But it wasn't as though, everyone who ever went to an Afghan camp was part of this, giant global jihadist movement of tens of thousands of people or anything like that at all.
In fact, when the U.S. invaded Afghanistan in 2001, they claimed that there were over 20 terrorist training camps, as they called them. They were all training terrorists to go and attack America. Well, this was an absolute lie, one among many. Most of the training camps, 90% of the people in the training camps were either Kashmiris being trained by Pakistani intelligence service, ISI, with full American knowledge to go and fight in Kashmir against Indian rule. That was the biggest group. And the second biggest group were people from Central Asia, mainly Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, who were being organized and trained to go and fight these dreadful communist regimes of Central Asia. Again, with full American knowledge. And finally, there were a group of Uyghurs, Chinese Muslims, from Xinjiang province in western China, who were being trained by bin Laden to go and fight the communist Chinese in Xinjiang. And this was not only with the knowledge, but with the support of CIA, because they thought they might use them if war ever broke out with China.
As late as when?
This is in 2001.
In 2001, with CIA backing, bin Laden himself, not just ISI types or whatever, but actually Al-Qaeda was working with the CIA and training these anti-Chinese Muslims?
Well, no, I wouldn't go that far. I would say that they knew what bin Laden was doing, and they were encouraging him through third parties, probably the Saudis. But the minute 9/11, well, you remember Washington was giving money to Taliban until 4 months before 9/11. The reason for that was they thought they would enlist Taliban to go and overthrow the Central Asian communist regimes and even attack China. But of course, when 9/11 happened, this dirty little secret was covered up. The files were burned, and anybody involved in it was sent off to purgatory.
And in fact, I'd like to ask you if you could expand on something that you've mentioned on this show before, which was that the Americans, I don't know, the military, the CIA, or both, or what, during maybe the late part of the Clinton term, early part of the Bush term, were either turning a blind eye or were actually helping the Uyghurs, the Chinese Islamic dissidents that were training in the camps in Afghanistan and going back to China. They're famous now because they're being held, some of them, in Guantanamo Bay and won't be released even though there's no charges against them and what have you. But here, again, was America backing jihadists, apparently, against the Chinese.
Well, yes, that illustrates Henry Kissinger's bon mot that the only thing more dangerous than being an enemy of America is being an ally, because these people were paid by the CIA, they were armed by the U.S., these Chinese Muslims from Xinjiang, its most western province, or Xinjiang, and the CIA was going to use them in the event of a war with China, or just to raise hell there. And they were trained and supported out of Afghanistan, some of them with Osama bin Laden's collaboration. And the Americans were up to their ears with this. But talking about supporting jihadist movements, my God, look at the whole Afghan conflict in the 1980s when they were our freedom fighters. Well, the people we're fighting today are their sons.
Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson claimed in a 2018 speech that up to 20,000 Chinese Uyghurs had fought on the side of al-Qaeda in Idlib, Syria. Several Chinese authorities believe these Uyghur forces were invited there by Turkey, a NATO ally. But why would the Western establishment concoct a genocide? What is the angle here? In the same 2018 speech, Colonel Wilkerson speculated about what a coherent U.S. strategy in Afghanistan might look like. The strategy would have three major components.
We're in Afghanistan as we were in Germany post-World War II. That is, for at least a half a century. It has nothing to do with Kabul and state building, nothing to do with fighting the Taliban or proving that we can reconcile with the Taliban, and nothing to do with fighting any terrorist group. It has everything to do with three primary strategic objectives. And I really, as a military officer, as a professional, I don't necessarily object to these objectives, but I believe the American people probably ought to be told about them, and there ought to be a debate as to whether or not they want to spend their money on these objectives. First objective is to be in the place that Donald Rumsfeld discovered was the most difficult country in the world to get military power into in 2001, and take my word for it, it is. Look at it on a map and leave it there, because it is the only hard power the United States has that sits proximate to the Central Base Road Initiative of China that runs across Central Asia. If we had to impact that with military power, we are in position to do so in Afghanistan. Second reason we're there is because we're cheek and jowl with the potentially most unstable nuclear stockpile on the face of the earth in Pakistan. We want to be able to leap on that stockpile and stabilize it if necessary. And the third reason we're there is because there are 20 million Uyghurs, and they don't like Han Chinese in Xinjiang province in western China. And if the CIA has to mount an operation using those Uyghurs, as Erdogan has done in Turkey against Assad, there are 20,000 of them in Idlib in Syria right now, for example. That's why the Chinese might be deploying military forces to Syria in the very near future to take care of those Uyghurs that Erdogan invited in. Well, the CIA would want to destabilize China, and that would be the best way to do it, to foment unrest and to join with those Uyghurs in pushing the Han Chinese and Beijing from internal places rather than external. Not saying it's going on right now, you didn't hear that, but it is a possibility. So that's why we're there, and I'll wager there are not a handful of Americans who realize that we, our military, has decided that for these strategic reasons, which are well thought out, we're going to be in Afghanistan for the next half century.
When revisiting the subject in an April 2nd, 2021 interview, Colonel Wilkerson reported this process may already be underway.
It was misinterpreted what you kind of meant to say, and I don't have the exact quote in front of me here, but the point you were trying to make was if we had a real war with China, then the idea would be to try to stir up trouble with the Uyghurs, but not that they had the idea to begin operations along those lines before any real war broke out. Is that correct?
Exactly. Now, complicating this, of course, and what the Chinese spokesperson was aiming at in her less than accurate reading of my words was the fact that there's speculation right now, hard speculation in some areas, and by hard, I mean it's coming from official sources, that the United States is already involved in this, that it's already joined Erdogan in Turkey, for example. You may recall, back up for a moment, Erdogan used Uyghurs passing through Turkey, and some say receiving some training in Turkey, to fight those elements in Syria that he was not happy with, including the Kurds. Mm-hmm. A lot of those Uyghurs now, I'm told, have by pretty good authority, have returned to Xinjiang province and are worrying the Chinese, as you might imagine, because they're trained and they're, you might say in China's eyes, hardcore Islamic terrorists to them. So that, joined by the United States, trying to get back in with a NATO partner, after all, Turkey, on the side, you might say, makes some sense. Not good sense in my view, but it might make some sense in somebody else's perverted view. So that complicates things, and I think that's really what the Chinese spokesperson was aiming at. These rumors that the United States and Turkey, perhaps others, are actually using that route to implement some sort of unrest in that province is bigger than France. That province in China, it's huge.
Oh, okay. So when you say official sources there, can you describe that at all? This has been published somewhere? You're talking about people that you know told you this?
Yeah, there have been people who have been writing about it in some of the more esoteric places on social media and elsewhere. But where I've heard about it is in conversation. But let me just back up for a minute and tell you that I was on a webinar sponsored by Princeton and a certain institute that is allied both with Princeton and the university and with the Prince of Liechtenstein in Europe, whom I've worked with before. I was on a panel, a webinar, not a panel, but a webinar this morning, listening to the Afghan permanent representative to the United Nations and the EU's representative on Afghanistan essentially talk about the peace talks, where they are, and the status of Afghanistan. And one of the things that I asked in the chat column was a question similar to the one you're asking now, and just to tell you that I got no response. The fact that there are rumors of it out there is what the Chinese picked up on. And I don't blame them, really, because let's just look at the United States record with covert operations. Hell, we tried to overthrow Hugo Chavez in Venezuela in 2002. We tried again under President Trump and failed abysmally. We've been trying to overthrow the regime in Iran through combined covert operations with Israel for years. We tried the same thing with Iraq. And I could cite you chapter and verse for all the governments we have successfully overthrown in the past 50 some odd years. So the fact that someone would say we were doing this is not unbelievable at all.
Sure. I mean, it's obviously an honest question and based on, reasonable background. As you said, for example, Uyghurs fighting, widely reported to have fought in Syria on the CIA and Al Qaeda side there and Turkey's side against the government there. But then, just to clarify, because you did say official sources, so I was wondering if you could say exactly what you meant by that and exactly to what degree they were saying that America's helping these guys go home to China from Syria, or?
Well, I'm not going to name any sources because I'd be getting them in trouble and they would never speak to me again.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say that this was the gist of it, that some of those people whom Erdogan trained or his people trained and put into Syria are headed home, and they are being expedited in that journey through Afghanistan. And they're not headed home to bake cake.
Despite the evidence and rumors that the United States and Turkey are covertly involved with the Uyghurs, eyewitness testimony procured by Adigert and the Xinjiang Victims Database forms the basis for most allegations of genocide, including a Banner New Lines Institute policy report, which argued the prima facie case that the Uyghur situation fits the definition of genocide under the 1948 Genocide Convention. In March 2021, this same New Lines report was plastered over every Western-aligned media outlet as the first, quote, independent report, proving the Chinese government is committing human rights abuses and genocide against the Uyghurs. A deeper examination of the New Lines report reveals that it is, in fact, not independent. Its principal authors, which include the aforementioned Adrian Zenz, are, quote, members of the Wallenberg Center and the hawkish Interparliamentary Alliance on China, are former U.S. State Department officials, and are ardent supporters of U.S. military interventionism. Furthermore, the report's financier and the New Lines Institute's parent organization, Fairfax University of America, is a sham organization whose accreditation was placed in jeopardy after the U.S. Department of Education recommended its termination. This occurred just days before the publication of the New Lines report. Given his frequent and vitriolic coverage of the issue, Tim Pool's failure to audit this story or to present any contradictory evidence is inexcusable. At its worst, it is downright sinister. Take, for instance, Tim Pool's chosen experts on the Uyghur issue, the cast of China Uncensored, whom he has platformed 3 times in the last 6 months, once before Christmas 2020, again at the beginning of March 2021, and a 3rd time at the end of June 2021. What Tim Pool may or may not know is that China Uncensored are an affiliate of New Tang Dynasty, NTD, a broadcasting entity also affiliated with the Epoch Times. Further, that the owners of NTD, the Epoch Times, and the cast of China Uncensored are members of Falun Gong, a bizarre spiritualist group founded in China in 1992 by its charismatic leader, Li Hongzhi. Falun Gong is a hybrid creation of Buddhism and Taoism, which involves meditation and adherence to Hongzhi's teaching.
Falun Dafa is an advanced cultivation system that was created by Mr. Li Hongzhi. It originates from the Falun Dafa cultivation practice in the Buddha school and cultivates Jun Shan Ren, or truthfulness, compassion, forbearance, the supreme characteristics of the universe.
The practitioners of Falun Gong receive the benefits of good health by having Fa energy implanted in their abdomen.
The universe is rotating. The Milky Way is rotating. The 9 planets are rotating. And the Falun is also rotating. When rotating clockwise, the Falun that Master has planted at the lower abdominal area automatically absorbs energy from the universe, transforms the energy, and helps a practitioner to practice. When rotating counterclockwise, the Falun emits energy. It can correct all abnormal states and bring salvation to sentient beings. This is referred to as salvation of both self and others.
Hongzhi claims that Falun Gong practitioners can levitate and walk through walls. He also claims he can, quote, use his mind to direct and order things to happen, and that, quote, aliens have begun to invade the human mind and its ideology and culture. Former practitioners have accused Falun Gong of being a cult and have explained that members frequently die from foregoing medical treatment. In 1999, Falun Gong ran afoul of the Chinese government. Hongzhi and many of his followers fled to New York City. They now reside in a secretive 400-acre compound in upstate New York. Soon after arriving in the United States, Hongzhi and his practitioners launched a campaign to expose the Chinese government's persecution of Falun Gong. In 2000, John Tong, one of Hongzhi's followers, founded the Epoch Times. After founding the Epoch Times, Tong and other Falun Gong practitioners created New Tong Dynasty, a non-profit broadcasting outlet. In 2009, after the Epoch Times and NTD had grown from small startups to sustainable outlets, their master, Hongzhi, personally addressed them in a combined staff event. In his address, Hongzhi reiterated the outlet's mission to, quote, become regular media and expose the evil of the Chinese government. Despite its protestations to the contrary, China Uncensored is a subsidiary of NTD. It even uses the NTD studio to film its content. Its cast are practitioners of Falun Gong.
Remember when I crushed one of China Uncensored's videos into tiny pieces of trash? This is so simple to do for me that it's almost boring. That particular video highlighted China Uncensored's appetite for war with China. But this Chris Chappell fellow, as we'll see, clearly doesn't have much to do with the message.
Whereas Qigong usually is just about doing exercises to keep fit and healthy, Falun Gong goes beyond that and requires its practitioners to live their lives based on three dangerous, subversive principles: truth, compassion, and tolerance.
Someone else is squirting information into his gray sponge cake. But who? To find out, let's start from the beginning. Chris Chappell, in his own words, I got really sick when I was 19 and went to the hospital. The doctors said I might have some rare heart virus, and I had a friend who was practicing some Chinese Qigong exercises. He showed me those exercises, and I immediately got better the next day. The doctors had no idea what was going on, I had no idea what was going on, and they discharged me from the hospital. Qigong, that's a really vague term, basically meaning Chinese exercises. A white 19-year-old kid in New York healed a heart virus with a single day of Chinese exercise. Well, at least it's not that Falun Gong cult hiding behind the slogan, truth, compassion, and tolerance you just mentioned. Just Qigong exercises. Okay, so then anyway, China Uncensored was born. And their first video was something about the movie Looper in China. Yep, in October 2012. We can even see a later comment by someone, who are here to watch the first YouTube video made by China Uncensored. But if we look at a now deleted version of Chris's Twitter, we find that actually the first video by China Uncensored was not about the movie Looper. No, it was a 3-part marathon about something called Falun Gong. Falun Gong is an extreme racist doomsday UFO cult. No, I'm not being hyperbolic. I was born and raised in Scientology before I eventually got out of it. I know a UFO cult when I see one. And in China Uncensored videos, Chris talked about Falun Gong so much over the years, it's actually surprising.
Falun Gong is a spiritual practice. Falun Gong, 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 Falun Gong.
Oddly though, he's never described them as a cult, nor detailed their beliefs. The closest he seems to come is vaguely saying that they're influenced by Buddhism and that they practice Qigong, the Chinese exercises. This is like saying Scientology is a stress relief therapy. Chris tries to bring up Falun Gong as much as he can, but without alerting his followers to this fact. Take, for example, this recent comment. Look at you promoting cult here on YouTube. Or this one. Or this one, in which someone specifically asks, could you clarify your link with Falun Gong? Chris replies twice, but never answers the question. The way he communicates reminds me of my cult family. They too speak about truth, but they don't have the courage to tell any. Anyway, it seems that pressure was mounting on China Uncensored because a few months ago they released a video telling you the truth about their funding.
More than 1 million subscribers. Who really funds China Uncensored? Mostly you. 72% of our income comes from direct viewer support.
Wow, over 1 million subscribers. It's true. Let me show you on Social Blade the social media metrics counter. China Uncensored. That's not the right channel. Weird. Anyway, this video is about funding.
Well, some people have suggested we're funded by the CIA or Falun Gong. We're not.
Oh, this isn't just a video about funding. People are saying that Falun Gong is making China Uncensored. And this is your video dispelling the rumors. Carry on.
And with no single big funders, no one can tell us what stories to cover or how to cover them.
You're independent. Got it. No one's feeding you anything to tell us. Thanks for finally ending any stupid ideas that China Uncensored is just a front for Falun Gong.
Our small team produces 3 to 4 YouTube episodes of China Uncensored every week.
Well, double that because you also have America Uncovered, which is another channel largely focused on hating China, and you have a podcast about hate, plus your clan meetups, lots of travel itineraries, multiple Patreons, Twitters, Facebook pages, merchandising, apps, websites, all the research, graphics, music, logistics, on and on. Not at all a small operation, but you're clearly trying to convince us that it is for some reason. So let's just go with it. Sure, China Uncensored is just 4 people, and none of them have anything to do with Falun Gong or its propaganda network, New Tang Dynasty.
And on top of that, we also turned those episodes into a half-hour TV show version, which we give to New Tang Dynasty Television.
So in addition to all that work I already mentioned, apparently you also have time to make a separate TV version. That's a lot of work. And, okay, I see. So you just give New Tang Dynasty these videos and nothing more. That sounds kind of suspicious, but come on everybody, let's take his word for it.
The network started by Falun Gong practitioners.
Started by Falun Gong practitioners? This is New Tang Dynasty you're talking about. the staff of NTD literally call the leader of Falun Gong their master when he gives them the instructions on how to operate. I'm not making this up. This is a matter of public record. New Tang Dynasty was started by Falun Gong practitioners because it literally is a propaganda arm of the Falun Gong. It serves no other purpose.
New Tang Dynasty doesn't pay us, but they do put Chinese subtitles on every episode.
Well, Chris, I guess you've proven that you're independent. NTD doesn't have anything to do with you. They just add some subtitles. That's nice of them. And, oh, sorry guys, I'm still trying to show you the metrics for China Uncensored on Social Blade, but I just can't find your channel for some reason. It's not coming up when I try the name China Uncensored. New Tang Dynasty, NTD. Their channels on YouTube are sometimes made with the same prefix, like NTD on music or NTD Japanese. I wonder, no, might as well try. Oh, what do you know? The name NTD China Uncensored pulls up your channel. And that's because the username of your channel is, for some reason, NTD China Uncensored. And now that I think about it, didn't I see NTD all over the place in your video descriptions? Weird. That is so weird. But anyway, sorry, go on, Chris.
Right now we're trying to save money by recording this show in a low-budget way, which happens to be a green screen taped to the wall of Matt's living room.
Right now, you're shooting in a living room. Right now, like for this particular video. You know, Chris, I totally believe you that you guys shoot in a living room. And that's beneath you. Maybe you should try using a studio for this kind of thing. Here, I'll help you find one. Let's start by looking where, I don't know, New Tang Dynasty is located. 229 West 28th Street, New York, New York, 10001. Here we go. There is a studio there called Big Apple Studios at the exact same address. They do work for various Falun Gong organizations, part of the propaganda apparatus. Well, anyway, you're welcome for helping you find them. Oh, hang on. It looks like you do use this studio after all. Or wait, is that you?
Good evening and welcome to the Big Apple Studios. I'm your host, Jason Smith.
Weird. So weird that you use NTD in your channel name and you use a studio in the same building as NTD. And who is this small team you mentioned earlier anyway? You've got credits on this video, the one talking about how you have nothing to do with NTD or Falun Gong. Let's see here. Your team is Shelly Zhang, Matt Gnizda, Seamus Light, and Chris Chappell. Okay, so just 4 people, none of which are New Tang Dynasty Falun Gong death cultists. Shelly Zhang. Where do I know that name from? I feel like it came up during my research somewhere. Oh, that's right. I know it from here, from New Tang Dynasty. Producer? That's weird, Chris. Oh, and Matt Gnizda? Oh, he's from New Tang Dynasty. China analyst. Oh, I'm sure he's really insightful. But Chris, did you not know about this somehow? I hope you haven't been busy doing all these totally non-Falun Gong Chinese exercises to notice all these Falun Gong cultists around you. Oh, sorry, I almost forgot about Seamus. Seamus Light. This Seamus Light, the video editor at NTD. Wait, video editor? Isn't that what you credit him for, video editing? How could that be true, Chris, unless NTD were creating China Uncensored? Oh, never mind. No need to answer that. He's put it on his website for all to see. He works at New Tang Dynasty. And what does he do there? He's a video editor for China Uncensored. It turns out that Falun Gong directly creates China Uncensored.
This is the same cast that appeared on Timcast IRL, Tim Pool's daily show, to accuse the Chinese government of committing genocide, systematic rape, torture, and organ harvesting.
In the late 90s, the enemy was Falun Gong, but they then killed them for their organs, and there was the Tibetans, which they've been targeting for a long time, and
Well, now that they've run out of the Falun Gong organs, they go to the Uyghur.
Yeah, I mean, and actually, we had a guest on our show talking about how, like, there's not a lot of Falun Gong practitioners in China anymore of a certain age group because so many of them have been killed for their organs. And now the Communist Party has just moved on to a new group to get new organs.
What do they use the organs for?
For transplants. I mean, I think
for like the people they like, for party members,
or people who can pay for it. It's commercial. Yeah. And so, like, what's happening with the Uyghurs? Like, we know about the concentration camps, right? We know about the how they're treating women and so on. But the thing that's not reported on very much is in Xinjiang, it is very likely that a lot of those people are being used as sort of a human organ bank. And when there's someone who wants an organ, they find a match from within that concentration camp system, and they will do a speedy match. And there's a lot of, I don't know if you want to go into it, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that they are in fact using Uyghurs for that, and it's coordinated by the same system that is doing the labor camp. So it's all part of the party's plan. This is not some black market group or whatever doing it. It's a fully coordinated effort.
It's the way that they subsidize their medical system because the government is not paying for it.
In the combined 4.5, now 6.5 hours of content that Tim Pool has filmed with China Uncensored, because they were just on the show on June 25th, how could Tim fail to question them even once about their affiliation with Falun Gong and New Tang Dynasty, especially when these accusations of organ harvesting notoriously stem from Falun Gong itself? Given the seriousness of the allegations and the implication of military or cultural confrontation, it is inexcusable to broadcast them as fact. So what about the other claims that Tim Pool and China Uncensored have made? Are there really millions of Chinese Uyghurs locked away in concentration camps? What about the drone footage that we saw? As investigative journalists at the Gray Zone report, the support for the U.S. State Department's claim that there are 800,000 to 2 million Uyghurs detained in concentration camps stems from two sources. One of those sources is, you guessed it, Adrian Zenz. The other source is the Network of Chinese Human Rights Defenders, NCHRD, a Washington-supported policy institute. NCHRD's 2018 report reached its conclusions after interviewing a total of 8 individuals. These reports are not credible. The truth is more complicated than Tim Pool, China Uncensored, and the mainstream media would have you believe. In fact, the truth seems more akin to the U.S.'s own prison system. According to Peter Lee, an independent reporter whose work appears in Asia Times, the Chinese government is attempting to integrate the Uyghurs more closely into Chinese society. The purported goal is to reduce terrorism and to transform the predominantly rural Uyghur population into cosmopolitan factory workers.
Incorporation of Xinjiang into the Chinese empires has always been a problematic issue, even up to and including the present day. So the current ruckus about the Uyghurs has to do with the fact that the People's Republic of China under Xi Jinping has pretty much abandoned its previous laissez-faire policy toward letting Xinjiang sort of drift along, and they are working aggressively to incorporate Xinjiang into the People's Republic of China and integrate the Uyghurs into Chinese society.
Mm-hmm. And then, so to cut right to the chase, the U.S. government says that's genocide. Is that right?
Yeah. It's not well, there's two angles to this thing. The first thing is that, of course, there's in the popular conception, genocide means herding people into camps based upon an ethnic identity and murdering them. That's the second part is not going on. Even Team Uyghur, the people determined to advertise the sufferings of the Uyghurs in China, have not made any claims of mass executions. What makes it a little more complicated is, as I put it on Twitter a while back, genocide convictions are like what we say in the United States about a grand jury. It can indict a ham sandwich. And the genocide laws are, the genocide case law is vague enough that pretty much anything that you do out there could be construed as genocide. Basically, the 1948 Genocide Convention defines genocide in several ways above and beyond, the mass killings of people. It does not include cultural genocide, which is what the Chinese program in Xinjiang looks a lot like. It does, however, allow for convictions of genocide on the idea of restriction of birth rates and reproduction. And Adrian Zenz came out with a rather, to me, convoluted and unconvincing statistical massage, where he tried to claim that the Chinese were practicing reproductive genocide out there in Xinjiang. So, it really depends on the venue where you go in, and who the judges are in that. So, if they're willing to take the Chinese side, it would be not genocide. But if they're going to take Adrian Zenz's side, then it is genocide.
Yeah. Well, and then the question of Zenz brings up of whether his stats are completely wrong or somewhat close or what. Okay, so here's a good way to get into this. How many people do you think are in these so-called camps, and just what is it like in there?
Well, nobody knows how many people are in the camps out there. The numbers have been thrown around. Basically, what's in something of an Adrian Zenz special. When he gives when he puts out his estimates, he said up to 1 million, and then of course the up to qualifier was dropped out, and everybody ran with 1 million. And then he said maybe 2 to 3. They drop out the maybe, and so now it's 2 to 3 million. I tend to doubt that there's as many as 1 million people in the camps. That would be 10% of the Uyghur population. A lot of hay has been made in the Uyghur sphere using satellite photographs to identify detention facilities and extrapolate from that the number of people who are currently detained. But the problem with that is that when China embarks upon one of these extensive programs, everybody gets money and everybody starts building. But exactly how many people were held in those camps and how many have actually been cycled through the system and released into society or into factories or something like that is something that nobody knows. But I think that one of the issues is that the Chinese government always regarded these camps as an arena for education, socialization, training, and eventually emptying out the camps and releasing the Uyghurs to a new lifestyle, which is more urban, embedded in the factory system, and not rural, peasanty, and liable to be more amenable to subversion and more conservative Islamic practice. Mm-hmm. So. Long story short is the thing that always bugged me about the data that I was able to look at is that, it's either from 2017 or 2018, or it doesn't have dates on it at all. So there's really no good time-related thing that I've seen that talks about the levels of people detained in the camps and how many have actually come out.
As terse as it is to say, the Uyghur population is worth much more to the Chinese government alive than dead. With that goal in mind, yes, vocational education and training facilities do exist in Xinjiang. The Chinese government openly admits this. It is unclear just how many Uyghurs are in these facilities and if they are there voluntarily. There is evidence that some are compensated enough to send money home to their families. Without a thorough audit, however, it is next to impossible to know the true number of Uyghurs that exist in these facilities and the reality of their experience there. Is Xinjiang a bastion of classical liberal ideas? Absolutely not. Neither, though, is it the Great Leap Forward or the Holocaust. Even if it were, the issue would not be solved by humanitarian military intervention. This is not our fight. Independent journalists and libertarians alike who parrot these Uyghur genocide claims as fact are simply carrying water for neoconservative and neoliberal China hawks who are preparing for a prolonged military conflict with China. Regardless of the fact that the U.S. State Department, NATO, the military-industrial complex, the establishment media, and statedly anti-China religious zealots are the purveyors of these genocide claims, Tim Pool and others in the alternative media parrot them without even presenting any contrary information. When some of Tim Pool's listeners commented on his recent deluge of anti-China content, Tim Pool claimed, "Come on, man, I'm just reading the news."
You know, I get messages from people whenever I cover this stuff saying, "Tim, you're fear-mongering." Look, I'm reading the news. Is it possible these news stories are just bits of propaganda designed to make you scared or think that China is evil and an enemy? Perhaps. We've seen it before, and we will see it again. They'll come out with news stories saying that Chinese soldiers are beating small puppies to make you think of them as villains. Dehumanization is extremely important if war were to be coming. And that may be the case. Now, I'm not going to pretend like China is innocent. We've got more than enough reports about what's going on in Xinjiang with the Uyghur Muslims. The fear there is, how much of it is propaganda? How much of it is true? Based on whistleblower reports, video footage, I tend to believe that it is true. I'm also scared that U.S. media and the U.S. government will be trying to manipulate us into believing that China is doing something truly evil in an effort to get us into a war. But that's a bit conspiratorial in the long run. I think we've seen more than enough out of Hong Kong, out of Taiwan, out of mainland China, and the Western region to know that China does engage in very horrific things. And plus, they're literally building up forces on the border with India. So I can only lean on my assumptions, presumptions, and what I've read and what I've researched. It seems to reason that China is actually playing very, very dirty. And the United States needs to stay on its toes. Do we want war? Of course not. Should we start a war? Absolutely not. But what do we do if China invades Taiwan? Do we sit back and say, none of our business? I mean, honestly, maybe we do. But then what does it mean for the rest of the world if China can just take over these Southeast Asian countries? Now, they claim Taiwan is theirs, but sure, Germany made claims about bordering regions and stole them too. You see where that leads? I don't have the answers to these questions. I just know that war is typically really bad and we don't want it. And we shouldn't be the ones to start it. But we'll have to see how things play out, especially when China begins building these nuclear weapons. So let's read and see where we're at so far. What's happening?
Despite its also questionable claims that China is building, quote, more than 100 nuclear missile silos in the desert, this video is the least hawkish piece of content that Tim Pool has released in the last year. Furthermore, Tim Pool may claim that he's, quote, just reading the news, but the obvious problem is that he's only reading from establishments that are in lockstep with the U.S. War Party narrative. If Tim is actually concerned that these news stories are U.S. propaganda, as he claims in this video, why did he not examine the counterfactuals presented here more closely? Did he look? They were not hard to find. It is laudable that Tim Pool resolutely stands against war with China, or at least he says so. On the other hand, Tim Pool's content is a large cog in a unified anti-China campaign launched by the West as part of its renewed Cold War policy. It is a policy that could easily become hot through runaway escalation or by accident. It is clear, however, that the U.S. taxpayers and the taxpayers of all Western countries will be fleeced by this escalationism. War is the most lied about affair in history. Likewise, war is both a racket and the health of the state. However, the foreign policy establishment still believes they require our popular consensus to wage it. Unfortunately, they may already have it. For more information and citations, check out Independent Media Parrots Questionable Uyghur Genocide Claims by Patrick McFarlane on the Libertarian Institute at libertarianinstitute.org or linked in the show notes below. For more anti-war China coverage and coverage on other libertarian topics such as libertarian legal theory, economics, and ethics, check out Liberty Weekly at libertyweekly.net.